So thank you for being here with me today.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Of course. My name's Gwen, as you know. And so I'm writing a paper on fracking in New York State specifically, and so kind of about the environmental and social impacts that it has, but then also looking at the economic, kind of doing economic analysis alongside with that and saying, okay, are there policies that we can implement as a government in order to mitigate the negative effects that we've seen from fracking? And so I guess...
And you're an economics student at Cornell, and you're a junior.
And I'm a junior,
Okay,
yes,
great.
yes I am. I'm studying economics and science and technology studies. And so I guess maybe you could just start a little bit by telling me a little bit of your background, kind of what you're doing now, and yeah, let's start with that.
Well, I'm Walter Hang, and I'm the president and founder of a venture capital startup called Toxics Targeting. And so 25 years ago, I got $540,000 from one of the wealthiest families in America, and I started my company. And what we do is we compile government information on about 700,000 known potential toxic sites in New York State. And what we then do is we map where these sites are located. And so typically we help engineers, environmental consultants that are checking properties that are going to secure mortgage loans. But we also help a lot of drinking water purveyors, and beginning almost 7 years ago, I became very, very interested in Marcellus Shale fracking because I had never heard about it. And then I went to a presentation, and I was trying to help the citizen groups figure out how they could, get involved in making public policy decisions, about this very, very important, initiative. And I realized they were totally hopeless. They would never figure it out. And since I was a former public interest advocate on environmental issues, I realized that I would have to get involved. Otherwise, there really wouldn't be any organized force, and that's what I did.
Interesting. So were you involved with the locals in the Marcellus energy in that issue, or who were you actually helping with the policy analysis?
Well, I very quickly figured out that the key assertion by the Department of Environmental Conservation, that's a state agency in New York, that was going to make a decision about whether or not to permit shale fracking. And so shale fracking is very different from conventional fracking. Conventional fracking is where you just drill down into a pressurized pocket of gas or oil. Then you can pump fluids into the rock to crack the rock to try to enhance the amount of oil and gas that you can recover. But Marcellus Shale is totally different. You drill down and then you drill through the rock. And for a given 640-acre spacing unit, which is 1 square mile, you can have up to 16 huge wells that are a mile deep, and they spread out in all directions. And fracking a single well requires 5 to 7 million gallons, typically of water with chemicals added to it and sand. So you crack the rock, and then the sand holds the little cracks open. So it's an enormous undertaking. So the Department of Environmental Conservation said, we've never had problems with conventional oil and gas extraction, and we think everything will be fine after we address just a couple of critical issues. Number one, because this requires so much water, would it have an inappropriate effect on water drawdown, like groundwater? Number two, would the city of New York's drinking water be threatened because they had upstate reservoirs in the Marcellus Shale region? And number three, since instead of being at a well site for 3 months, you might be there for more than a year, what would be the untoward effects of any? But the key thing I focused in on is that the DEC said, oh, we've never had problems. Our existing regulations are totally fine. And I've been working with the Department of Environmental Conservation's own data, literally for decades. And I said, that can't possibly be. And so what I did was, I looked at 30,000 reported spills. And I sifted through the data with my geographic information system. And I identified literally hundreds of fires, explosions, huge gas drilling and oil drilling, wastewater spills, people who had to run for their lives, well water that got impacted. And so then
that was just from conventional drilling.
That's right, just from conventional drilling.
Right.
So the truth of the matter was that the state of New York had not properly regulated oil and gas extraction. The state had inherited a huge legacy of contamination problems. And so my specialty is I can take these hard data and I can tell the press. And that's exactly what I did. And so I got front page news coverage in the Gannett papers, which are basically the Ithaca Journal, the Press and Sun Bulletin, and the Star Gazette in Elmira. And it was one of the most amazing leads. It was something like the state's story of a well-regulated oil and gas industry just got a shot of muck in its eye.
Oh my God.
And so once that story hit the fan, then we began organizing citizens, elected officials, organizations. And so people were very, very concerned about shale fracking, even though they didn't really know that much about it. And so Toxics Targeting initiated what we call the New York Marcellus Shale Campaign, which ultimately got 50,000 signatories to these very, very penetrating coalition letters. And then we just kept hammering away on the concept that this draft supplemental generic environmental impact statement was so woefully inadequate that it should be withdrawn, it should be sent back to the drawing board, started all over again. And we essentially did that twice. And then ultimately, by the time that the governor, Andrew Cuomo, finally was forced to face the political reality of this, he prohibited 300,000 or more gallons of hydrofracking. So we won this amazing victory. It's not total because the document, the finding statement for this final supplemental generic environmental impact statement is so poorly drafted, we don't really know what it says. It says it's going to prohibit high volume hydraulic fracturing, but the devil is in the details.
Right.
And so it's an amazing success story about how technical analysis can generate press coverage, can generate citizen action. And so I worked for 12, 18 hours a day for almost 6 years. But we built this amazing campaign of people who were very knowledgeable, very, very involved, and ultimately, along with hundreds of other groups and thousands of other fractivists, we were able to bring incredible pressure to bear. And that's how New York became the only state anywhere in the country that isn't going to allow shale fracking, at least in the short run, where there actually is shale to frack. Some other states have banned it, but they don't have any, shale to frack, so it's really symbolic victory. But this was an incredible, hard-fought battle, and that's how come now we're trying to figure out how can we expand our victory in New York to other states and ultimately to the rest of the country.
Right. Well, that's just incredible. I mean, the fact that you took a team and you were able to show them, you had hard proof. You found the evidence and you were able to influence policymakers, and I think that's one of the issues surrounding the whole issue of shale fracking and the oil industry is that there's so much opposition, or there's a disconnect between, is the gas actually creating these environmental problems? They're saying, oh no, it could be a number of different things, and trying to argue it differently, these oil companies and different people. And so I think that the fact that you were able to connect direct evidence with, these oil wells and the drilling is very impressive, because from the research that I've done, it seems like few have been able to make that direct connection.
New York is the only place where we've actually documented direct impacts where the fracking companies actually took responsibility. So my specialty for nearly 40 years is using the Freedom of Information laws to get original documents. And so that's how we prove that we had people whose wells got fracked and the companies took responsibility, put them up in hotels because they couldn't live in their homes, paid for water filters. I mean, it was really an amazing scenario that no one had ever heard about, right? You listen to the industry, oh, we've been doing this for decades, we've never had problems, it's totally safe, right? And then when you actually look at the records, you go like, wow, right on letterhead, you know, you're offering to pay off this family because of the problems that they had. And then once I found those people, I could go and talk to them and interview them and videotape them. And so I found people whose water was fine, they had lived in the same house for decades and decades, and then companies did a survey around their property and suddenly you could light their water on fire.
Yeah, because of the methane, right?
Yeah, because of the methane migrant. That's in Candor, New York. That's right around the bend practically from where we live. And I found people whose wells got fracked and, you know, companies paid for a water filter. I mean, it was really very, very damning. So that kind of innovative research using the government's own information was very, very powerful.
So where did you actually get the information from? Like, was it the oil companies who were releasing documents about reports they had done, or was it government information?
So a lot of the information that I got was right from local, state, and federal government agencies, notably the Department of Environmental Conservation and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. But I also got an amazing treasure trove of documents from, for example, the Chautauqua County Department of Health, the Allegheny County Department of Health. And so New York has essentially 3 counties where there's been a lot of conventional drilling going back to 1821. Chautauqua County, Cattaraugus County, and Allegheny County. And so these counties in the southern tier have thousands of wells. And they had a memorandum of understanding with the State Department of Environmental Conservation that in effect they were going to be the first responders to problems. And so I got all that documentation from the local and state authorities, and then I also got federal data. And then once I began to go through the spill reports and the documentation about problems, then I actually got lawsuits, I got settlements, I got, you know, oil and gas company data, and I got, you know, essentially a way to talk to the people whose lives had been disrupted by these problems that up until that point really no one knew what was going on in New York.
Yeah, and so, but these are not, this is hydraulic fracking, right? This isn't just conventional, so this is both?
Well, conventional fracking is vertical drilling,
Right.
but 90% of the wells that are drilled in New York until very recently were fracked. But that's not the horizontal.
So that was just the Marcellus, was the horizontal, was adding that aspect to
That's
it.
right. See, the key thing with Marcellus Shale is that it is this very thin layer. It's horizontal. It's anywhere from 400 feet thick to maybe 900 feet thick. But it's not very thick, and it's about a mile down. The key thing with Marcellus Shale, the gas is not present in pressurized pockets. Like everyone has seen those old movies where you hit the pressurized pocket and the oil shoots up into the sky because it's under tremendous pressure. So tight Marcellus Shale has the methane gas in tiny little pores. And the only way to get it is you got to drill through the rock and you got to frack those sections of the well. And you have to do this in all directions every square mile. If you look at maps of where conventional wells are, you'll typically see, oh, we have a lot of wells in this area because they have those pressurized pockets. And there'll be a huge area where there's not a single production well. There are a lot of dry holes. So it's hit or miss. You either hit the pressurized pockets of oil and gas or you don't. But with Marcellus Shale, it's so costly to frack these enormously huge wells. You got to do it every square mile. So it's an industrialization on a level that really can't be believed. And you're not doing it in West Texas or some arid area in North Dakota. You're doing it in an area that's very, very lush. It's got a lot of water that can get polluted. And it's much more populated. So that's how come this was really different. And that's how come we put everything we had into trying to figure out how are we going to safeguard New York. And we basically said, you know, these are the concerns. You have to address these concerns. If you don't address the concerns, you cannot allow this to proceed. And ultimately, we were able to persuade the powers that be through technical analysis, through political organizing, and through media coverage that they could not go forward at this time.
Yeah, no, and that makes sense. And so while you were going through this process, I mean, you were talking about the 3 different areas of New York that have been most affected by the drilling and the fracking. What was the most shocking thing that you saw in terms of like your concern about the environment and the community and going there and seeing the health concerns that this caused in these local communities?
Well, I literally would go out into the field and I would meet these people. For example, Dave Eddy. And he lived right across the street from multiple production wells, conventional wells that had been fracked. And so his wife was bathing their 2 infant children. One was, I don't even think, a year old, and suddenly the gas and the toxics came blasting out of the tap in the bathtub. The house filled with flammable gas. They could smell it. As you can imagine, they completely freaked out. They're running around trying to get their babies out of this home, afraid it's just going to blow up, and then their well got polluted, and they actually got put up in a hotel. They actually got a filter. They were offered a settlement. So I met people whose lives had actually been impacted by the reported fracking. But then I would also go out into the middle of nowhere in like Allentown, New York, Bolivar, New York, and I would see these pits and these ponds and these horribly polluted lagoons, right, where the production wastewater, or otherwise known as the brine, was being dumped. And the ground and the groundwater had, was so polluted it had killed all the vegetation. There was thick oil contamination all over the place. It was impacting tributaries, and of course I videotaped it and I took pictures. And when I was out there, I found another family, and they got impacted by a well that was being fracked, and oil shot out of their shower head while their son was taking, a shower. It totally polluted their well water. Their washing machine filled up with oil. Their toilets filled up with oil. They literally couldn't use their water. So it's only when you go into the field and you meet these people and you look at, the data, it's that combination of technical analysis with ground truthing. And that's, I think, what gave me a lot of motivation to say, I'm not letting this happen, to the other areas of New York, notably Shenango County, Tioga County, Broome County, Chemung County, and Steuben County. Those were the 5 counties where the Marcellus Shale fracking would occur.
It must have been so broad too, because it expands, like you were saying, it's this industrialization of the fracking process.
Oh, it's unbelievable. If you look at pictures of like the Bakken Shale formation in North Dakota, and I've actually, flown out to California, and you can look at sections of Colorado where they've been fracking 3,000 wells a year. And in New York, there has never been even one shale frac production well anywhere in the state. We are batting 1,000, knock on wood. But out in Colorado, you can see the well pads. They're very evenly spaced to the horizon, as far as the eye can see, particularly in southern Colorado. I mean, it's an industrialization that literally can't be believed unless you go out there and you look at it, you go like, holy mackerel. You know, this is why gasoline prices have plummeted, because we are producing more oil than in the last 45 years because of shale fracking. We've been producing gas on a level that the price has plummeted, but not in New York. We haven't had one new gas production well in recent years. We are down to producing in the entire state of New York not even enough oil on a day-to-day basis to fill one backyard swimming pool. We are strangling this fossil fuel production industry at a time when the rest of the country is fracking like there's no tomorrow. And the amazing thing is, everyone says, oh, fossil fuel is bad. It's going to, warm our planet. It's going to contribute to all these irreversible pollution problems. So the answer is, well, if it's bad, we shouldn't be using it, right? But all the other states we're going to do all of the above. We're going to become energy independent by getting oil, getting gas, and getting coal. And oh, by the way, we're going to do solar, we're going to do wind, we're going to do geothermal. Well, that's just not going to work. You can't continue to be addicted to oil and gas if you want to make the transition to these alternatives. So New York, in addition to blocking fracking, in the last 3 months has come very close to potentially killing a 124-mile giant pipeline called the Constitution Pipeline. And this would convey gas from northeastern Pennsylvania all the way to New York, near the Capital District of Albany, and then it would continue to New England, and it would also go to New York City. So this would perpetuate America's addiction to fossil fuel. But we did the same thing. We documented huge explosions, huge fires, huge ruptures, toxic discharges that had never been cleaned up. And so this challenged the assertion of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and Governor Cuomo that, oh, we're going to prevent all these problems, and any problems that do occur, they're going to be, mitigated. It's like, well, we've looked at pipelines all across New York that are conveying oil, natural gas. They've all had problems. You didn't clean them up according to your own data, according to your own standards, and therefore we don't think that New York State could issue a Section 401 water quality certification for this giant pipeline saying it's not going to cause water quality violations.
Right.
And so that's that wonderful technical analysis combined with media, combined with grassroots organizing. And so in just 3 months, we've sent thousands of emails and letters and made phone calls to the governor. And these are very sophisticated requests for action. He's going to have a very hard time ignoring us.
Right. And it sounds like we have a lot of support too. If you have thousands of letters going, I mean, you must have a big, but there is a huge community. I know, even growing up in Ithaca, New York, that is very against fracking, very against, I think, growing up around like that rhetoric was made me very aware of the impacts that it can have on a community.
See, the amazing thing is that is absolutely true. Ithaca is a hotbed for anti-fracking sentiment, right? But there's anti-fracking sentiment all across the country. So why is Ithaca so different from Colorado, North Dakota, Texas, Arkansas, all these other places, they're in Pennsylvania, they're fracking like mad? It's that they're organized politically. And so we have this huge coalition, and they're very, very used to taking political action now. So they write these unbelievably, well-drafted letters, beautifully written, but they echo these technical requests. And then they call, and they torture the governor. They get into arguments with the governor's staff, right? And they're very, very knowledgeable. They really know what's going on. They're now, in effect, experts in public policy and about fracking problems. And so they can quote this chapter and verse at the drop of a hat. And now they're learning a lot about pipelines, and they're learning about fires, explosions. And so if you go around the country, most of the advocacy is based on, I don't want it, I don't like it, I think it's bad, I want clean water, right? It's just boneheaded. Now you got these people, we request that you deny the Section 401 water quality certification required for the Constitution pipeline to be built, right? And here's why. And so it's a very interesting experiment, I believe, in how the American environmental movement can be revitalized and how it can be effective again after literally decades of decline, because the big environmental groups just really want to raise money. They don't want to get into fights, they don't want to get into disputes, but that's the essence of the environmental movement. You got pollution, you don't want the pollution, then you got to get into a fight. There's no other way around it.
Right. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And well, I think it's interesting though, because as I've been doing my research for my paper, you talk about these testimonials that you have from people, and I think after doing a good amount of research, there are very few of them out there. There are very few of them that you can see, and you can see the actual impact that fracking and drilling these oil wells in communities has had. And I mean the constitutional pipeline, it's not even something that it was just like not even on my radar before this interview, it's interesting because I think a lot of the companies, I'm sure, they have a lot of power. The oil companies, they have a lot of power over the media, over what gets put on the internet. And I think before our interview, I think it was yesterday, I was looking up, is there a way that shale fracking, which now after talking to you seems silly, but was there a way that it could be sustainably supported? Is there a way that it could allow us to get this gas that in some ways people argue is more sustainable than regular fossil fuel because it has less emissions into the atmosphere? But that being said, there's a Center for Sustainable Shale Development or something. It's like that. It doesn't make any sense. It's like two things butting heads, and I was like, I don't see how there can be a Center for Sustainable Shale Development, because how could it ever be sustainable?
See, the trick is, I am not someone who hunts and gathers, right? For a living. I have a car. I take kids to hockey games, right? I buy food in a store, right? I live a pretty normal existence. And so the key thing is, I understand you need petroleum to run our economy right now. But the key thing is, you have to reduce the amount of fossil fuel that we're consuming, because we know it's polluting. There's no effort to do that, really. Everyone says, oh, we're going to replace oil and gas with solar, wind, geothermal, we're going to have all these little microgrids and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, we can't even maintain the infrastructure we already have, right? And so once I started looking into this, again, it turns out that wind, solar, and geothermal provide a grand total of 1.1% of New York's primary energy consumption. And almost all of the renewable energy that's being produced is being produced by hydropower, generated at facilities that were built 50 years ago. No one's going to build giant dams anymore. They're too expensive. So if you think that New York really does not expect to need any more electricity in the coming decade, how are you going to replace the 56% of the electricity that's being produced right now by natural gas or natural gas with oil backup? There's no plan for that. And so again, you have environmentalists talking 100% renewables, right? But that's not happening in any meaningful way. And so I have a plan: kill the pipelines, kill any power plant conversions that would addict us to natural gas for 50 years. Like, we have a coal-fired power plant in Lansing, New York, right outside of Ithaca. And a decision was just made not to convert that to natural gas. That's huge. Coal can't compete against natural gas. And so we've had multiple coal-fired plants just shut down. This one's going to shut down. That'll leave one coal-fired power plant in all of New York. And so nuclear is not able to compete against natural gas. So we have to kill off as many of these power plants as we can. That means we have to reduce energy demand. The way you do that is you insulate every home. You insulate homes and you're not using as much energy. There's no effort to do that, literally in decades. So people like to hear a sexy story, a wonderful solar, wind, geothermal future. The truth of the matter is, don't use as much electricity. Insulate your homes. Then you won't need to heat them as much. And then don't drive as much. And then use LED lighting. Really simple things that could be replicated all across the country. And then we're doing fine. Our economy is robust, we're just not using as much fossil fuel. And that's not that hard because there are all these studies that can show that it's easily accomplished. It's just we're too addicted to oil and gas. So New York, again, is like a laboratory on how you come up with these policies. And what we want to do is create a barrier to shale fracking because it's the least regulated heavy industry in America. You can take this incredibly toxic brine production wastewater, and a lot of places they just dump it on the ground. Or they dump it into local wastewater treatment plants, right? Including Cayuga Heights. Cayuga Heights, one of the wealthiest little communities on the planet, was taking gas drilling wastewater at its treatment plant. It's not designed, constructed, or maintained in any way to handle this stuff. It's going right into southern Cayuga Lake, upstream from the Bolton Point water intake for 30,000 people.
Wow.
And so we stopped that. And then we documented this problem in the New York Times. And then a teacher called me after he read about me in Ian Urbina's Drilling Down series in the New York Times. He was in Aubrey, says, hey, this article says we're taking gas drilling wastewater too. And so I said, I'll come and meet you. And I met this guy, Terry Cuddy, and I met his wife, Beth, and I met their little hardy band of activists. And so they were so amazing. They took my data and they started working. They built this coalition. And then they got into a huge fight with Auburn because Auburn was making money taking that gas drilling wastewater. And then, we miraculously won. Then we prohibited this gas drilling wastewater dumping into the local wastewater treatment plant. Then the Republicans knocked out the Democrats. They wanted to lift the prohibition, but by then Region 2 EPA said, no, you can't do that until you conduct what's called a headworks analysis to show you can handle it. And then this headworks analysis came out, and it showed they couldn't take a gallon, not a drop. And so this is an example of how one teacher, with someone like me who knows how to read the data, knows how to get press coverage, knows how to do the grassroots organizing, right? Headed by local citizens. They're Albernians. They love their town, right? People would come from all over the state. I'd see them and they'd say, oh yeah, I live in Buffalo now. You came for this hearing? And that's what is setting the precedent so that ultimately we hope no communities can accept this toxic radioactive gas drilling wastewater in treatment plants that are not designed, constructed, or maintained to be able to handle this stuff. You can't dump it anymore in pits, ponds, and lagoons. You can't spread it on roads to melt ice and snow. I mean, this is actually allowed in a lot of areas. So once you know what the plan is, then you can implement the plan, and as long as your strength holds out, you can achieve great things. You just have to know what to do. And that's what we're trying to help other states with. So the amazing thing is, because there's no pipeline to get Pennsylvania shale frac gas to market, the boom in Pennsylvania has gone bust. They're down to 19 drilling rigs in the entire state. And that is lower than when they started the fracking boom in 2008. And there's so much excess oil and gas production that the number of drilling rigs nationwide is at the lowest in 70 years. So this is the time when we need to basically say, hey, you want to drill? That's great. You want to frack? That's great. But you have to accept strict liability in case anything goes wrong. You got to post a bond. You got to take out huge insurance, not just to plug the well, but to clean up these enormously huge contamination problems that occur, right? And so financial surety, private right of action, get your day in court. You can't dump this toxic waste anymore. Can we get those little safeguards put in place? It's going to have a huge effect nationwide.
Yeah, no, and well, I was just going to ask, in terms of, it sounds like you have had a lot of, maybe not opposition, but hesitancy from the governor of New York, and when you're trying to implement these actions that are helping these local communities that have been affected. And so I guess my question is, if you were to get the governor of New York to back you and what you're doing right now for all these people, what policies do you think would be most effective in terms of, say, like reducing, so like you mentioned like cleaning up these big spills and like avoiding these explosions, and you're saying, okay, if you want to drill, you can drill, if you want to frack, you can frack, but how can the government kind of, like, any policies you think would actually make a difference in kind of reducing the impact that these things have had, but then also maybe adding onto that, reducing the total amount that we are relying on fossil fuels, because that is the long-term goal.
It's the beauty of democracy, right? It's government by the people. Is that once you know what you're doing, you can pass laws. You can adopt regulatory controls. That's what government does, right? You and I can try to protect our own health, by making sure we eat healthy food, or by not driving like a lunatic, or by not doing anything ridiculously dangerous, right? That's our individual right. But when it comes to protecting public health, you really can't test your own drinking water, right, for the wide range of toxic chemicals and lead and heavy metals. That's why we have government. That's why we have health authorities to protect public health. Well, that's where the governor comes in. So the governor was not favorably inclined in the beginning. So we bird dogged him when he was running for office, and he put out then a policy statement that said, all watersheds are sacrosanct, but we want to get the economic benefits if it can be done safely. Well, that's the trick, right? How do you do it safely?
Right.
And so then in the ensuing 4 years, we've just documented, we organized, we brought more pressure to bear, and the key thing is we prevented Andrew Cuomo from going forward and allowing shale fracking. And then we got these very important policies, that were kind of guiding principles. So what we now need to do is, number one, we need a deal that says, anyone that's harmed, you get your day in court. You have a private right of action. Number two, anyone that wants to frack, they got to, take out insurance. They have to post a bond. They have to make sure that there's financial surety, right? So if anything goes wrong, the private right of action can result in the problems being resolved. Everyone's made whole, right? But then, in addition, there has to be strict liability, right? Which just means you didn't need to be negligent. Hey, the problem happened, boom, you're totally on the liability hook. But then, we don't want shale fracking, right? Because we don't know how it can be done safely. So then the policy is we got to stop using fossil fuel. And so the governor said energy efficiency is the best way, to meet the needs of the economy, and to protect the environment. Then he didn't put any money into the budget. Not a penny, not a farthing, not a shekel, right? So you say, that's not really a meaningful implementation of your policy, right? So were I a lobbyist, I say, that's not acceptable. We want you to cut, energy usage through reduction, through energy efficiency, through insulation, through all of these cheap, cost-effective means. And we want you to reduce demand dramatically, let's say 50%, right? Through no impact on the economy. In fact, it would bolster the economy because you'd have all these people running around insulating homes with blown cellulose, which is just chopped up newspapers and magazines with a little bit of boric acid mixed in. How simple is that? You can go to Home Depot and you can buy a big brick of this blown cellulose insulation. It's called Greenleaf. If you buy it now, it's probably $12 in effect for a cubic yard. If you buy it in the heat of summer, it's like $8. And so I insulated my beautiful little arts and crafts bungalow, which had like virtually no insulation. I insulated the whole thing for like $140. Then I put in a programmable thermostat. Then I, improved the fixtures. Then I got a better refrigerator. I made this all back in like 2 months.
Wow.
Because my heat wasn't going through the roof. In Ithaca, you drive around in the wintertime and we actually have snow and ice. You can see which homes are insulated and which ones aren't. The homes are insulated, they're covered with snow. If they're not insulated, the roof is bare and they have huge icicles. Because the heat went through the roof, melted the snow then dribbled down to the eaves, right? Once the water got over the cold air, icicle city. And so this seems so sensible, right? But the environmental groups never push this. They're just totally on another level where it doesn't matter if they win or they lose because they're telling their membership, we're fighting tooth and nail. And the truth of the matter is they're avoiding fights at every turn. And I know this because my former colleague is the head of EDF, Environmental Defense Fund. He and I were sweating to death in a little library in Washington, seemingly not that long ago. And EDF is a hugely successful, firm. Or I married a woman who was a fundraiser for Natural Resources Defense Council, like $110 million a year entity. And the way that you test your effectiveness is you say, okay, well, if you weren't here, what would be the difference? Right? If NRDC and EDF weren't around in the shale fracking fight, there'd be no difference in New York. They were totally not involved. If I got hit by a bus, then there wouldn't have been hundreds of alerts. There wouldn't have been all those data analyses. There wouldn't have been all that organized effort. And you can see that at toxicstargeting.com. Click on Marcellus Shale. You can see the written alerts, you can see the videos, you can see the events where people almost kill themselves, working like dogs year after year. Summer heat, winter cold, pouring rain, you name it, we did it, and that's how we won.
Wow. Yeah, no, it's an incredible story, and I just wonder, if you were able to take what you've done here and put it in Colorado, how effective could you be because it's already so prolific there?
See, the trick is, number one, we've already expanded to Pennsylvania. All we have to do is kill this Constitution pipeline.
Right.
So we have 9 days from today. And after March 31st, 2016, they can't cut any trees to build this giant pipeline until next November. And then we have until April 29th, 2016 to convince the governor to kill the Section 401 water quality certification. If we are so fortunate as to survive this fight and win, Constitution will be dead as a doornail. Then that will set a precedent It'll also kill the Newmarket pipeline expansion, which goes right through Ithaca, right through Ellis Hollow. It's right next to the Cornell campus. Then we'll kill the Northeast Energy Direct, the NED, which in effect parallels Constitution. We kill these 3 giant pipeline projects, then there are going to be no giant new natural gas, oil backup power plants. And then we're going to have to reduce demand. So once we get another state to have prohibited shale fracking like Pennsylvania, now we're not alone, right? And that's when you begin to go to a place like Colorado.
Yeah, the ripple effect.
Right, and all you gotta do is you gotta show these people, right, how to do it. You have to run a campaign. You look at Bernie Sanders, right? A year ago, no one thought he had a ghost of a chance. They scared Hillary Clinton to death, right? He came within a hair of really picking up a head of steam.
Yeah.
And so it's very tricky. It's like running a campaign. You got to find the young people. You got to find the elderly people. You got to find the people who have the most to lose. You got to organize them. And that's the key thing. That's how come it's just like a hockey team. Everyone has a role. Some people attack, they score goals. Other people, like your brother, they defend. They drive the attackers to the outside with their low percentage shots. Then you got a goaltender. The goaltender's got to keep the puck out of the net. You get enough people working together, you win. It's as simple as that. You're victorious, right? And that is why I think I'm really different from almost all the environmentalists. I survived collision sports my entire life. And so I know there's a big difference between winning and losing, and I don't like losing. And so you can find people in every single community who care about one issue or another, whether it be feeding poor people, taking care of animals that are mistreated, or they love public education, or they care about the environment. You can train them. You can teach them, how to be very, very effective advocates.
Right.
Like we're in Mann Library here at Cornell. You look out at those kids, they're going to run the world. They are studious, they're smart, they're bright, so are you, right? You're ultimately going to have an incredible opportunity to do great things. I mean, you want to survive, right?
Yeah.
You want to make sure you don't wind up homeless, right? You want to make sure you don't wind up destitute. But in those salad years when you are optimistic, when you are fired up, when you really want to make a difference in the world, all you need is the opportunity. And so some of the people out there are going to become incredibly wealthy, or they're going to inherit great wealth, or they're just going to plain have a lot of money. And you meet these people, they can fund you. And then you can get going. Then you can find people who say, wow, that was an amazing job. I want to give you a contribution. Hey, do you have a fiscal sponsor? I'd appreciate a tax break, but I don't need it, if you can't give it to me. Then you learn about the mechanics of running a business. And a not-for-profit business is very similar to a for-profit business. So every day, I got to bid, I got to beg, I got to grovel, I got to plead, I got to make sure my factory is, functioning well, my staff get compensated, I don't have any problems. And anyone that runs a business, now you got a million problems every day, right? But once you learn how to do it, you can do it. You can be very effective. You keep growing, you keep exploiting opportunities. And that's what's allowed me to keep toxic targeting running for 25 years while I get to do this amazing public policy work. So I'd love to help Colorado because Colorado is where undoubtedly they have the same kinds of problems that haven't been documented, that I found in New York. Can't be that hard to figure it out.
Yeah, I'm just still so baffled that they haven't been documented at all. Like there's been some disconnect between these explosions going on, the impacts that the drilling and the shale fracking have had, and it's still going on. It's almost unbelievable.
See, what's really interesting, right? So your brother is in Silverton, Colorado, rafting away and leading all these, river trips, and then boom,
All of a sudden.
an ancient mine, right, that the Environmental Protection Agency is actually trying to clean up, has an incredible blowout. And the next thing you know, this unbelievably pristine, wonderful river looks like curry. It's a color that can't be believed. And those are heavy metals, right? Now, if I were in Colorado, right, if my company were based in Durango, right, I'd say, wow, I wonder how many abandoned, unplugged wells and abandoned, unremediated mines there are. Mines fill up with water. Then that water gets polluted, right? And so I don't think anyone took the initiative to say this tragedy in Silverton is merely evidence of the toxic legacy that we've inherited in Colorado from more than a century of hard rock mining. And so we have to make sure that these tragedies don't happen in the years to come with gas and oil fracking. And then that's why I'm pleased to announce a campaign to blah, blah, blah. And they didn't do that because they don't know how to do it. Because all they're going to do is they're going to call for a fracking ban. It's not going to happen. But they'll protect one county where Boulder, Colorado is, right? But that's not where they're fracking. And so that's the difference, is that the environmental movement has to get back to doing the hard work of actually solving problems. I mean, I'm like a dinosaur in the age of mammals. I don't know why I continue to believe that that's important, but I do. It's just like you can't talk about educating your children. You have to educate them.
Yeah.
You know, that's really important. It says, oh yeah, you know, I sent my kid to a great school. Well, how did they do? Did you help them? Were they successful? Right, that's just the first step.
If you talk the talk, you gotta walk the walk.
That's right. And so that's how come the environmental movement is wasting staggering amounts of money, like $1 billion a year just in America. We're not getting anything for it. So all these people that I've organized, community by community, you know, they are now, I think, much more aware of how you can be effective. And so when they get some self-serving, victorious email from some environmental group, they immediately forward it to me and say, is this true? And I'm like, no, it's totally not true. Right? The Constitution pipeline has not been put on hold. Right? They're saying that the startup will be delayed by a year because we're holding them up. Right? But it's not like they said, oh, we're not doing it. Right? People can't really discern what's going on until they get the experience, right? Everything sounds good. I'm all for the environment. You listen to Donald Trump, it sounds really good, right? And then you say, well, he doesn't really say anything, right?
Yeah.
And what he's saying doesn't really comport with the reality of the world, right? So that's how come it's trust but verify. What exactly is it that you're proposing? How is this actually going to work? Where's the beginning, where's the middle, and where's the victorious end when the problem is solved? That's all we want to know.
Right. Yeah.
And if you tell us in a way that we're persuaded, we'll help you. If you tell us and we determine that you're the enemy, that you're not going to help, then we're going to have to beat the crap out of you. It's not personal. But if you change your mind, then we're happy to work with you again.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
But we are very, very concerned about these problems. And we really, really need you to help us. And if you don't want to help us, you're going to turn your back. That's your decision, but you're going to take the hit.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, it's also made these people, they have to take responsibility. Like, people have to take responsibility for what's happening. And I think that, I mean, you guys are doing, it sounds like you're doing a fantastic job of holding them responsible, which nobody has done in the past.
See, it's very tricky. Like, if you go to toxicstargeting.com, click on Marcelo Shale, and read all these recent letters that we've been bombarding the governor with. I mean, he's getting like 50 a day.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have this wonderful email form, right? And then you can say who you are, where you live, what your concerns are, and then it echoes this very, very technically, accurate request to deny the Section 401 water quality certification.
Mm-hmm.
And so many of these emails start off, you're my hero for banning fracking, right? You're a climate change warrior, thank you so much. And so, again, these people are so hopeful.
Mm-hmm.
They have no idea how devious high-level government officials and politicians can be. And so the high-level politicians, and Barack Obama was once my public interest colleague at New York Public Interest Research Group. He's the worst case, right? You go like, well, what is it that you're actually going to do on protecting the environment? You know, he wanted to allow offshore drilling in the East Coast. He wanted it in the Arctic, right? And so you have to trust but verify. You say, well, how are you a climate change warrior, right? The government says, I have the most aggressive agenda. You say, well, yeah, but you didn't implement the agenda, right? That's like having a lot of hopes and dreams. That's wonderful. I commend you on having wonderful hopes and dreams. But what did you do? What were the problems that you solved? And if you didn't do that, you're not effective. And why should we have a governor who's ineffective? Who just talks big and then doesn't, fight it out and actually, solve problems and made improvements. You wouldn't accept that for, women's rights, poor people's rights, education, protecting the environment, providing security in communities, right? These are all the same. If you don't have an effective government, then why are we spending all that money?
Right, yeah.
That's all we're asking, is to find out, how can we participate? That's the beauty of democracy, right? That's how come all these government data are never copyrighted. It's the concept that we want the people who are making the decisions to be well informed. We want them to be educated. So yeah, go hog wild. Read the reports. Learn about the data. And then you'll make better decisions. That's the theory. And that's what's worked tremendously in our history. But then they have to learn how to be good advocates. It's just like if, heaven forbid, someone had a child that had learning needs, right, that weren't being met by school. You got to be an advocate. If you have a loved one who has health problems, you're going to have to learn how to, get the health care that's required. It's no different from anything else. It's just that we've begun to tell a lot of people, you just can't write a check to these big environmental groups and assume that they're going to do the heavy lifting, solve the problems, and work really hard. They're just not effective. And that's how come we now have an alternative, to the big enviros. We have grassroots groups that are very, very involved.
Yeah, and sound very effective. I mean, it has been in New York.
See, they have a stake in the outcome. Like all these people who are along the Constitution pipeline alignment, right? They do not want that pipeline to be built. They don't want compressor stations to be built, right? And so that's how come we're organizing them. We're literally going to their communities and saying, I implore you, right? Don't think that you can just say, I don't want this, right? You gotta find local officials who stand shoulder to shoulder with you. They've then got to write the governor. They gotta tell the governor, no, in certain terms, this is unacceptable for my community. Today I got an older woman in Ithaca to write a letter to the governor. That's what it's all about. You're just saying, will you help? Well, do you really need me? Yeah, we really need you. Okay. We know you've done really good work. We've worked with you on a lot of other issues. This is going to help. It's a force multiplier. And so I really believe, again, it's like coaching a hockey team. It's like coaching, any group of people where your experience and your acumen can have good effect. It's like, guiding a flock, right? You say, okay, what do we want to do? How are we going to do it? Once you've agreed on a plan, right? Then go forward. Everyone knows what their role is. That's how you're effective. You got to work together.
Definitely. Yeah, especially with people who have been affected directly. Because like you said, they do have a stake in the outcome if you're located near a drilling site or near where fracking is going on.
Right. Like on a final note, one day, a year and a half ago, this librarian named Erin Heaton, who's just tremendous, she's so meticulous about tracking who's signing the coalition letters and things like that, who's not signing, right? If someone doesn't sign, they're ducking it.
Right.
And so she says, hey, I think that woman, Zephyr Teachout, signed one of your coalition letters. I'm like, you're kidding. And so we met, Zephyr Teachout, and she said, I'm with you. She signed both our coalition letters, calling for, the revised draft supplemental generic environmental impact statement to be withdrawn, right? And then we met her, we had an event, We had 100 fractivists come to Ithaca to hear her speak, hear her say what she was going to do. Then we had a fundraiser at my house where your parents came,
Yeah.
and Zephyr got the second largest individual contribution for her entire campaign.
Wow.
And then we threw a bucket of water over her. It was tremendous. And so this issue then became a huge factor in the primary, and she lost, but she came within 9 votes of taking more than half the counties in New York. Now, a lot of those counties didn't have a lot of people. That's why the governor won. But she took 1 million votes from Andrew Cuomo's, original vote tally. 1 million is a lot, and then just weeks later, he agreed to the prohibition. So this stuff doesn't happen by accident.
Right.
The governor is doing the calculus of the political benefits and losses. At a certain point, you say, throw in the towel, buddy. You're not going to win this. They're not going to go away. You're just going to take more hits. And that's why we won a huge victory. Shale fracking's prohibited. That's never been done in the history of the country. But we can't rely on that. We have to keep fighting, because a week after the whole proceeding was over, we found out in Barton, New York, they proposed gel propane fracking. I was like, oh, that can't possibly be allowed. Then I look at the findings statement. I can't find a definition of high-volume hydraulic fracturing in the text of the findings statement. And then I look and I find it in a footnote.
No.
And then I see high-volume hydraulic fracturing is limited to 300,000 or more gallons of water. So gel propane, nitrogen fracking, carbon dioxide fracking. As you know, you can pressurize any gas until it's a liquid. Those are all not included in the fracking prohibition. So we've been working very, very hard to kill this gel propane fracking proposal in Barton, New York. The amazing thing is we found out the state of New York knew about this proposal because the applications had been submitted before the final SKIs had adopted. They cut them a safe harbor protection. So these battles never end. And you have to keep fighting, but that's how you get strong. That's how you learn the trade of affecting, favorable public policies. And once you learn how to do it in one state on any issue, you can do it anywhere. You'll have learned, the craft of actually, fomenting public, advocacy, and then knowing what's a good deal. Most of the time.
Most of the time. Well, thank you very much for your time, and I really appreciate hearing about your story and the experience that you have had for the past 25 years. And I'm grateful that you're with us in the Ithaca community and in New York, because, who knows where we would be right now if shale fracking had been allowed. So.
Yeah, it would have not been as good. And it's a pleasure to talk with you. I love your family. Your family helped. They were part of this. They would sign my coalition letters. And so I'm grateful for their help. And I'm very, very happy that you're at this wonderful institution and that you're clearly doing so well. So keep thinking, keep writing, and good luck with your paper.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.